Hi, I'm Marge Heiser, and this is the best of times. And you know, it really is the best of times because it's April. And April means springtime. And I'm sure, even though it wasn't a terrible winter, it's still kind of nice to be out of it, hopefully. But April also means something else. April is Autism Awareness Month. Now, I don't know if many of you know about that, but this is a time for people to be aware of autism and help in any way they can. There are a lot of kids out there who really need your help, be it prevention or treatment or however you can contribute in any way. And here to talk about this today is Dr. Jolene Ross of Wellesley. And Dr. Ross is the creator and director of Advanced Neurotherapy in Wellesley, and we'll be talking about that later. And also Rachel, I was about to say Tortellini. It's Tortesini? Your name?
Tortorici.
Tortorici, okay. Who has an autistic child, and she'll tell us what it's like and the advancement that he's made in treatment, which has been really astounding. And I think a lot of people don't think there's much help, but there really is. Anyway, greetings to both of you.
Hello. Hello.
Jolene, what is autism? Give me a definition.
A gentleman named Canner, quite a number of years ago, identified autism, and he used the term autism, which means inside. Autism is a disorder that pulls you into yourself. You don't come out, so to speak, in a social way. So eye contact is impaired, communication is often impaired, there are often developmental delays associated, and there's a lack of interest in people. And there's the eye contact. People with autism are more likely to be looking at the mouth, for instance, and things that are in motion, because the mouth is in motion, as opposed to eyes and working out what you're meaning. Communication is not, that's not an issue for them because they're inside.
Would this be a frontal lobe manifestation, bad manifestation?
Frontal lobe is part of it. We work a lot in various regions, but we certainly work in the frontal lobes, and the interesting thing about the frontal lobes is their ability to control the rest of the brain. And so in most cases, working the frontal lobes and working those connections will bring the rest of the brain on board.
Now, up till this point, hasn't it taken a long time to come up with any treatment for autism? I mean, I would hear of this child or this one who had an autistic baby and all that, and it seemed hopeless in all the cases that I had heard of, or they felt hopeless about it. Is this fairly new, this kind of treatment?
Neurofeedback is relatively new. It came out of the founding research occurred in the 60s, and it came out of the labs in the 80s. So it's a relatively new phenomenon. And we have, in my office, have been particularly interested in autism because of the dramatic improvements we've gotten with people, and also how incredibly reliable our results have been with autistic children.
What are the theories that cause, how do they feel that autism has arisen in children, one thing or another? At birth or later on, or what?
It's usually diagnosed at about 18 months or later. There's some research going on at Yale in the Child Study Center to attempt, based on eye contact, patterns of eye contact, patterns of where the eyes are looking, to see if there's a way to identify autism earlier, more in the first year.
Okay, but you said it's identified at 18 months. But when do the symptoms really first take place, from birth on?
I think that's a hard thing. The issue is that parents will be watching their kids. Unless you have multiple children, most parents, they have a sense, and they'll bring their child to the pediatrician. And the development, there's a fairly wide window of development, and one of the reasons I think that children are not identified until about age 18 months is because the delay becomes large enough to be sufficiently discrepant for the pediatrician to say, yes, there's something going on. And there's always the hope that the child will come out of themselves and everything will be fine. But again, I think that there's still a lot of foundation research going on, and it's interesting that the whole eye contact and where the eyes go, there's the possibility, it looks like, that that may be one of the ways that we can identify autism earlier.
Do they not respond at all to parents? They never look them in the eye with any recognition of any kind?
Well, there are varying degrees of autism,
Oh,
so
I
it's
didn't know
not
that.
necessarily the case that they don't ever, but they're interested in other things. They're not particularly interested in people. They're interested in interacting with things, with toys.
Was Dennis, what's his name, Hoffman, in Rain Man,
Yeah.
Dustin Hoffman, in Rain Man, was he autistic?
Was he autistic or was he?
What was he? I've forgotten.
I don't remember.
I thought he was autistic.
I don't remember. He may be, because there was one of the things about autism, there's a term that was used in the past, a term called the idiot savant, because one of the things about people who are autistic is they typically have certain areas in which they really have extraordinary intelligence.
Okay, that was it.
And
because
extraordinary
he did.
capacity.
Yeah, I mean, his mathematic abilities.
Yes, yeah,
were,
that's not unusual.
I mean, almost beyond belief. The things that he could add up or multiply huge numbers in one thing or another.
Which makes us wonder
Yeah.
about the whole timing, because obviously there are areas of the brain that are elegantly preserved, and the brain will put effort into developing those areas that it has to use those to support function in general.
When you're giving treatment to somebody and they're apparently succeeding, the areas in which they exceeded before, which seem to compensate for what the other one wasn't doing, what happens with that area? Does that slow down?
No, those are very well preserved. Our experience is that we don't lose when we do neurofeedback, we gain.
Now, Rachel, you have twins.
Yep,
Identical twins?
fraternal.
A girl and a boy.
Girl and a boy.
And the girl seems to have developed normally,
Yes.
and the boy obviously is autistic.
Mm-hmm.
What was the difference like in the first 6 months between the two of them?
The first 6 months, there wasn't really any difference between the two.
Really?
No, not that I could catch. I didn't notice.
Was he responding when, like a lot of babies do, when you talk to them, one thing or another, and you try and get them to laugh and
Yep,
smile?
at age 6
He did
months.
do that.
Yep, yeah, he did do that. I always remember him flapping. He always
Flap.
flapping his hands. He'll just go there and go like this when he gets excited. He always did that since I remember. His eye contact was, I think, was okay. Back then at 6 months, I don't remember. But the only time I really remember at age 13 months when my daughter was starting to walk,
Mhm.
my son wasn't walking. He had no interest to walk at all.
But that doesn't necessarily have to be autism. I mean, there are kids.
But it's like almost like a little bit of a delay that she was walking and he wasn't, and he would want to walk because she's walking.
Oh, he wanted. Then, okay, but then this was not something introverted. He was expressing a desire into the outside world.
Did he want to walk?
talk.
No, he had
I
no
mean, to
interest
walk.
in walking. He had no
Okay,
interest in
he
walking.
wasn't.
Oh, I thought you said he did.
No, he had
Okay.
no interest in walking.
No,
She would have
okay.
expected that he would want to walk
Right. Oh,
because
okay.
his sister
Because
was
his
walking,
sister was walking,
Okay.
yeah.
but
Yeah.
he wasn't interested. But if you brought him to the pediatrician at 13 months
Mhm.
and said his sister's walking, he's not walking yet, the pediatrician would say, but that's
Doesn't
still
matter.
within, well, but it's,
Within the- in the
it's still
reason.
within normal limits.
Yeah.
Was he crawling?
Yes, he was. Yep.
And did he crawl at a normal time?
Mm-hmm. Yep, his crawling was fine. He didn't want to stop crawling.
Did he stand?
No.
He didn't want to stand up.
No, not at
'Cause
13 months,
that's usually, I remember my oldest daughter, 6 months old, she pulled herself up on the playpen, and I thought she was a total genius. And, but yeah, this one ultimately turned out to be a dancer and everything else. I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with motor skills
Yep.
in the legs, one thing or another. And, did it even occur to you that it was autism, or did you just think that it was something with his body?
I did not even know what autism was back then.
Oh.
I had no clue. I thought that he was just being himself. And I remember sitting him in front of the TV, and I was saying to him, I said, Nick, look at Mama. Nick, Nick, Nick. And he didn't want to look at me. He couldn't hear me. He just focused right onto that TV. And that's
You're just
when...
being a normal man.
Exactly. Like his dad. So I brought him into his pediatrician, and then that's when everything started to click in. That was probably about 13, maybe about 14 months, and then we seen a neurologist. And
What did the neurologist say?
he did a whole bunch of different tests. I mean,
Like?
at that time, he wasn't walking. There was probably about 17 months, and he was, picking him up, gave him some toys, trying to talk to him, looking at him, eye contact, and it was actually about 3 different doctors coming in and doing them tests.
Where was this?
This was at the Mass General, and then he sat me down. He said, PDD, developmental pervasive, how do you say?
Pervasive developmental delay. Disorder, yeah.
And
Is that a more technical term for autism?
It's it comes under the umbrella of autism.
What makes it more specific?
it's more on the, if you look at a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest of autism, he's more down on the lower scale of it, so it's not really a...
Not as severe.
It's not as severe, yes.
Not as severe, not as delayed.
So, so we got the diagnosis, and he didn't really tell me much about what PDD means or whatever, so I went to straight up to Barnes & Noble, sat down, got my coffee, got the book, and read all about it, and I was like, oh my gosh. And I just couldn't, you know, I sat there crying because I didn't know, I didn't understand exactly what it was, and that's when I started getting reading onto the internet and talked. Then we got, went to another doctor at Children's Hospital, and then we sat down and we got, you know, the full diagnosis of it, and this is where he was already in early intervention already at the time, so that's when the speech came into play, the physical therapy came into play, and everything just started to come in and working in with him.
Was this a neurologist you saw?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you asked them, how did this happen? Did you?
I did. Of
what did they
course I
say?
did. Well, it depends on who you talk to. You know, some people believe that it's genetics. Some people believe that it's just part of the brain. Some people believe that it's the mercury in the shots.
We'll go into that because I have
Mhm.
another case that I can tell you about that makes me wonder. Well, I'll tell you quickly now. A friend of a friend had twins, identical twins, and let's see, a girl and a boy.
So they weren't identical.
Okay.
They were fraternal. Yeah.
I always thought that you could have a girl and a boy in
No.
one egg.
No.
No, okay. Fraternal.
Yeah.
Whatever. And one would assume that there would be a tremendous amount of things that were the same. At any rate, the girl went along fine, the boy became autistic. And the girl had the shot. Measles, diphtheria, what is it altogether now? Whooping cough, measles?
Mumps, measles, and
Okay.
rubella.
Whatever. And let's see, which one? No, I guess it was he who had the shot, and she didn't.
Right.
At any rate, he became autistic, and she's fine. But they were automatically blaming it on, there's mercury in that shot?
Yes, it's called thimerosal. It's a preservative.
And that's one of the theories. And I've heard this before, but this was, you know, she felt, what else would have done it? Jolene, what are some other theories about what causes autism?
Well, years ago, they thought that mothers could cause autism in terms of the way that we mothers interacted with our children. But the prevailing notion is that it's genetic, and with the genome, mapping the genome, there's a lot of work looking for what genes may be related to autism. And one of the big questions, I think, is if it's genetic, what do those genes do?
Well, why don't they both get it if they're twins?
Well, if they're...
If it's one egg.
Well, if it's one egg, again, we were talking earlier about schizophrenia, and schizophrenia is if you have one twin, it's not necessarily the case that the other twin will have schizophrenia. I think it's a big question. What gene, what are we talking about? Once the egg separates that first time to make the eggs that turn into two separate human beings, there are a lot of divisions that happen. There's a lot of DNA replication that's going on. And we don't know which DNA error, whether that's an error that occurs in the original egg or it's an error that occurs during the replication as the baby develops. And if they're discordant, then one possibility would be that it would be one of the replications during that development. There are a lot of variables, and you know, when you're working with humans, it's very hard to control for all of those variables.
Now, another theory is that it's psychological. It's a parent who does not communicate well with the child.
That's the old schizophrenogenic mother notion that they had quite a long time ago.
Which seems, have they abandoned that theory by now?
Yes.
Totally abandoned it.
Yes.
There was a
go ahead. Oh, the reason it came about was that these are babies that when you pick them up, they don't kind of mold to you the way other babies do. And they might arch their back and, you know, kind of pull away. And so the mother then responds differently to the baby than you do to a baby that molds to you and all of that sort of thing. And so when they observed mothers who had children who were autistic, the mothers, of course, are responding differently to the children because it's a dyadic dance that goes on. And so they assumed that the problem was the mother until they really came to understand that that's not the case.
Also, maybe there are tendencies in the mother, the same genetic tendencies. Even though she's not autistic, she could be distant and not warm up to the child as much. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Well, it's interesting in the Asperger's world. Asperger's comes under the umbrella of autism, but people with Asperger's disorder are not delayed in language, and they are not delayed intellectually either. And so the main delays are the social delays. And it's interesting that there is a high preponderance of people when there's an Asperger's disorder child, it is often the case that there is a parent who either has Asperger's disorder or something called the shadow syndrome, which means they have sort of some of the disorder but not severe enough to be diagnosed as having Asperger's disorder. And that certainly is a factor in the parent-child relationship because autism is a social interaction.
Yeah, I was going to say you respond to, exactly. We're going to take a short break, and we will be back talking about neurological diseases.
The brain is probably the most impressive and complex structure in the universe, never resting, yet responsible for every thought, motion, response your body makes. So it is no surprise, like your computer, your car, a simple tune-up every now and then could help keep things running more smoothly. That's where neurotherapy, or so-called brainwave training, can help and might even treat disorders like depression and anxiety. So what is this form of alternative treatment and how exactly does it work? Joining me now is Jolene Ross, a licensed psychologist and the founder and director of the Advanced Neurotherapy Clinic in Wellesley, Massachusetts. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Explain what happens if I were to do this.
First, most people call, and I ask them a bunch of questions so that they have a good sense of what this is about and so on and so forth. Then you come in for an intake, which takes about an hour and a half, and I'm asking you all kinds of questions about your history and how your brain currently functions, what works, what doesn't work, those sorts of things.
That's that sort of thing, that session that begins with, so what brings us here?
I start my intakes with a magic wand.
You do? What do you do?
I do. I'm very careful to make people understand that I do know that it's pretend, but we're going to pretend that this works. It usually does, and the computers make it work. Unlike most magic wands, it takes time. People think that, you know, one session, boom, we're going to have everything. That's not how it works. But what do you want to be different? And that's how we get to goals, because if I say, well, why'd you come here? Then people are kind of thinking inside the box. If I say, well, what do you want to be different about you? Then people are opening the box, and they're thinking much more in terms of what their wishes are. I had one little boy say, Dr. Ross, I've gotten all my wishes. Can I have the magic wand again? I want to make some new wishes.
Well, one of the things...
Back again with the best of times and neurotherapy with Jolene Ross, Dr. Jolene Ross, and Rachel Tortoricci. Tortorici. I'll get it sooner or later. Okay. Anyway, Jolene, what is neurotherapy?
Neurotherapy is a way to retrain the brain via the electrical system, which is the EEG, electroencephalogram.
And what is advanced neurotherapy?
Advanced Neurotherapy is our clinic where we do neurotherapy, and it is our goal to use neurotherapy and to get the very best results possible in our field at this time.
Okay. Not everybody knows what an EEG is. Would you tell us?
Well, it's similar to an EKG, which more people are familiar with.
Electrocardiogram.
Exactly. An electrocardiogram is, if you will, mapping the electrical output from the heart. That's what we do with the brain. It's a bit more complicated because we use a lot more sites, and we are mapping. So we come up with output that looks similar to an EKG, but we also have output with pictures that look a lot like an MRI. And we also have output that looks like graphs, so that we have a lot of different ways that we look at the EEG and compare it to what we would like to be seeing in a high-functioning, normal, healthy person of the age of the person whose EEG we are examining.
Okay, what's the first thing you do when a patient comes to see you?
Well, the first thing I do is an intake, so I ask a lot of questions, starting with history, usually in utero, if or at adoption, whichever is the case, and then a lot about function, because our goal is to improve function. So I want to know, where are we starting? What are the strengths of this person? What are the weaknesses? What are the goals? We really start with goals, because if we don't start with goals, we don't know where we're headed. So that's our first step.
So you're putting electrical charges into the brain?
Never.
Okay.
Never.
Explain what it does.
Okay. At the next appointment, we do an EEG. It takes about 2 hours. We do it in our office. It is in some ways different from a typical EEG that's done in a hospital, in that we use a cap, which is more typical of emergency rooms. It's just easier and more comfortable. We don't have to use glue that way. And we also take data a little bit differently, because we're looking for how the brain performs and how it changes gear, so to speak. So we'll take 3 minutes of data with a person's eyes closed, 3 minutes with the eyes open, 3 minutes reading, 3 minutes doing math, 3 minutes listening, and 3 minutes, we're now including some research that we're doing, 3 minutes watching a little video clip, which is called the social attribution task.
Okay, we're pretty soon going to be running out of time.
Okay.
So let's get down to the main thing. After you do all that, during a treatment, actual treatment, explain what you put on the head and what it does for the brain.
Okay. Well, first of all, for special needs children who are not, it's not appropriate to be doing all of those things, we will adapt so that we get the data that we need. And we're able to do that with all of the children that we work with. When it comes to training, we put sensors on the head that listen to the electrical output. We never input electricity. That information goes to our computer, and we set the parameters to reward a mix of brain waves based on that EEG and based on the presenting problems that we expect are going to improve functioning. And then for every quarter of a second that the brain is doing what we ask, there is a reward. And that reward is in the form of a sound and a simultaneous change on the computer screen. And for kids, we use puzzle pieces that turn into pictures, images, fun things that they really like.
And for, I was going to say humans,
For adults.
adults.
We have
What
that,
kinds
but
of
we
things?
also have other options. We have bars where you can learn to actually control your EEG much more directly. And we also have a screen where you get to look at your EEG and learn how to control it. That way we teach you how to do that, and there's particular changes in colors and so forth, so you can tell when your EEG is getting engaged in doing what we would like.
Basically, we're talking about energy, are we?
We're talking about electrical energy,
Yeah.
and we're talking about operant conditioning, so we are rewarding the improvements, and your brain learns to do that, and it becomes part of who you are, just like learning a motor skill.
And now your son, Rachel, has shown marked improvement going through this procedure?
Almost definitely. His language just skyrocketed in the
Really?
last few months, yes. Very much so.
And what about his contact in the outside world, where he was more introverted?
He is hugging people, coming up to people and just saying, "Hi, I love you," and give them hugs, and hugging his sister. His language, when I got married just recently and my daughter was all dressed up, she went, "Oh, what a pretty princess," he said to her sister. So it just amazes me, absolutely amazes me.
That's fantastic.
Tell him about his leg.
His leg, where his communication came about, he actually told me we had this thing where his leg's been bothering him, and there was a tumor inside of his bone, and it's a benign tumor, which actually he told me, he said, "Mama, my leg hurts. My leg hurts here. This is where my leg hurts." And he just got his surgery this past Friday, and he's doing very well.
Amazing.
Until he was able to understand that talking and so forth was about communication and getting his needs met, he was not able to tell them where the pain was, and they had not been able to identify the location of the tumor. So this was
Yep.
a very exciting development for him.
Thank you, Dr. Jolene Ross, and thank you, Rachel. It was a pleasure having you. And all of you out there, stay tuned to the best of times.